witness the escalating violence in Syria, Yemen, the Middle East, the West Bank and Gaza among Israelis and Palestinians, the violence ongoing, historic, in places like India and Pakistan and various tribes around the world. We can all lick our wounds and just await our opportunity to retaliate, to even the score. What Joseph does in Genesis 45 is simple. He keeps score no more. In his Genesis commentary, Walter Brueggemann puts it this way. Joseph breaks from the past and its debts, trespasses, Anglicans say, and invites his brothers to put that pitiful past behind them as well. At the Living Stones conference in Texas, Stephen, a young priest from Nevada, told us how his sister and he did not speak to each other for 10 years until recently. It had, he said, reached the point that the original offender had become the one offended against because the other party just continued to hold on to the hurt. But then reconciliation broke through, and there was no more keeping score. In our relationships, in our families, and in our congregations, there are often long-standing, unresolved estrangements, or at least at times there are. Siblings have not spoken to one another for years, and who, like Joseph, do not even know if a family member is still alive. A sin of commission or omission can drive people away, whether it's a word of anger from another parishioner, ignoring them, not speaking to them, or the failure of a pastor to call or visit or speak or act in a timely way. So how does reconciliation or forgiveness in today's gospel that Brad read, or peace and healing, how do they happen? It is not something that well-meaning bystanders in personal relationships or in international affairs can legislate. To be forgiven and to forgive the sin of racism, for example, are always gifts of grace that come from someplace beyond ourselves. Can we recognize that grace? Joseph did. He certainly did. Do not be ashamed, he said, because of how you treated me. He says this to his brothers. For God sent me here ahead of you to preserve life. Somehow Joseph could see God at work, not only in the good things and successes that happened in his life, but even in the evil done to him by others, by his own family. Joseph's decision to keep score no more creates the possibility of a new future for himself and for his family. Otherwise, they would all still be controlled by and captive to the past and their present or future drive for retribution until they all become sightless and toothless, and the whole world becomes so in the same way. It is important to remember, though, that no one could tell Joseph, or you and me, that God has brought you here until Joseph discovered that for himself. He could not see good coming out of evil. Nor can we tell someone who has suffered a great evil, like my late friend years ago, Lori, that God is bringing good out of tragedy. If it is going to happen, the victims must discern for themselves that God has somehow created and is creating new life out of their and our suffering. That out of their survival, God's grace can even provide food to save the nation, to save others from famine. In Joseph, we see a foreshadowing, of course, of Jesus. In antiquity, there were many variations on this golden rule that Jesus commands his disciples in Luke chapter 6, that Brad read a few minutes ago. The Mediterranean cultural value behind this rule is reciprocity, a word describing a variety of give and take or back and forth exchanges between individuals or villages. Around the globe, peoples keep score. If I have compromised or my group has made concessions, now it's your turn, or your group must make even greater concessions. And while this may be to some degree true in government or business, it is not true in the life of Christ. That's why, Hutus and Tutsis and people all over the world have waited to get even with the other, the peoples in Yemen now. Even for some Anglican and Catholic bishops, violence against the enemy tribe in Rwanda was more important than their religious vows. Now that is taking retribution to a great extreme, where that value of getting revenge overwhelms, that feeling overwhelms even our Christian principles. This is why peace talks and negotiations in places like Jerusalem have a hard time getting anywhere. Around the world, people ignore Jesus' teachings about love for enemies, doing good to those who hate us, blessing those who curse us, praying for those who abuse us, and forgiving. There are moments when we do catch glimpses of kingdom ethics breaking in. Jesus tells the disciples, "You know the system this world runs on. It's all about keeping score. If you injure me, I retaliate and injure you and take advantage of you while you're down. Someone gives you a gift, you give one back. Someone invites you to dinner, you reciprocate. But what credit is there in that for you?" Jesus asks. 3 times Jesus asks, what credit is it to you if you love only someone who loves you? If you do good to someone who does good to you, to me? If you lend to someone who will later lend to you? The Greek word translated as credit is charis, which most often translates as grace. So what grace is it? Then what grace is it that of ours to love those who love us, who do good to those who do good to us, or lend to those who can lend us something in return. What Jesus calls on us to do is to keep score no more, as Joseph did. To trust our God who went to the cross, settling a whole world's old scores, and then tore up the balance ledger. Can we, however, appreciate, love, do good to, and give to, and spend time on someone who is not only foreign to us, not only unconnected to us, but even connected in a negative way, who has stolen from us or disfigures our property out of his needs or for no good purpose? Can we love, pray for, spend time with those who are criminals, those who have been imprisoned? Or do we calibrate? Do we calculate exactly what we owe to one another? We can never even the score with friends or with enemies. After all, sometimes good news, good things are bad news and bad things. And bad news is good news. Witness Joseph, or witness the cross. Witness our own lives. Do not fret because of the wicked. Just give up keeping count. Instead, follow Christ as he reveals himself on the holy cross in a great paradigm shift. With our enemies, live into our own little Marshall plans, if you will, except even more. We are to lay down our lives not for an institutional church, but with a gospel church, the Jesus movement that exists to sacrifice itself on behalf of all those beyond her walls and her numbers, out of love for God and neighbor, without any hope of repayment or even recognition. In the name of our Lord Jesus Christ.